Joe Shuster grew up idolizing bodybuilders, such as those in the circus. As a scrawny kid living on the wrong side of the tracks, he wished to be one, and this fascination would fuel him for the rest of his life. Eventually, Shuster, along with his friend Jerry Siegel, would create the world-famous Superman, an incredibly strong character with a costume very similar to that of the bodybuilders of the day, including the now iconic red trunks. The trunks have become a part of Superman's iconography, just as much as his cape and his symbol. But they've drawn the ire of some fans, and DC has gone back and forth on their inclusion in the costume. While some may say that the new look is better, ultimately Superman needs the trunks. While some may call them unrealistic or too cartoony, they are anything but, and they ground Superman in reality more than armor ever could. That's right, today we're talking about what Superman wears on his crotch. Before we go any further, I'd just like to take a second to suggest subscribing. I've got new videos every week covering a bunch of topics just like this, so if you like the video, then maybe press the red button down below. I'm trying to make it to 200 subscribers by the end of June, because that will be the 1-year anniversary of the channel, so I would really appreciate it. Anyway, let's move on. A lot of the criticism stems from their older look. As we've already established, the Man of Steel's costume was heavily influenced by the circuses of the early 20th century, so this makes sense. Older Americana is infused into the red, blue, and yellow DNA of the suit. The critics say that these old-fashioned sensibilities have no place in the modern world we live in. You really think criminals would be worried about a guy wearing underwear on the outside of his pants? No way! Well, these critics got what they wished for when the New 52 rolled around in the late summer of 2011. Starting with Justice League #1 by Jeff Johns and Jim Lee, the trunks were gone, lost in the past with telephone booths and fedoras not worn by the Question. The new look was much more akin to armor than the spandex of the olden days, making the Man of Steel look tough and battle-ready. This look was further solidified by Zack Snyder's Man of Steel film from 2013. While Henry Cavill's suit in the movie isn't identical to the New 52's, several design cues were clearly taken from the newer version, most notably the lack of trunks. Since then, this new design has been used off and on. While the armor-clad Superman of Injustice did have red coloration in the crotchular region, the most recent DC Animated Universe movies, put into a universe called the Camu, have gone without them, first adapting the New 52 look, and then eventually the suit worn by Clark Kent during the Rebirth era of comics. Speaking of comic books, in comic book continuity, Superman eventually regained his classic look during Action Comics #1000, a decision championed by incoming scribe Brian Michael Bendis. Prior to this, the Man of Steel had worn a sort of hybrid between the new and classic look during DC Rebirth, first without the red boots and then with them, among other additions, following the Superman Reborn storyline. He also lacks the trunks in the most recent season of Young Justice, exclusive to the DC Universe streaming service. Here's the first problem with the Sans trunk look. There's just too much blue. I'll admit, this is more nitpicky, and your mileage may vary on the opinion, but with the classic suit, the red trunks break up the colors nicely. There's more balance. Here, it's almost all blue, with only the belt, the symbol, and the cape to offer any supporting colors at all, and it's very minimal. Now he's basically wearing a baby's onesie with the Superman logo on it. It's certainly not the most egregious decision made for a comic book costume, not by a long shot, but it doesn't have the same grace as the classic look. In continuity, though, there are other, more significant problems with the look. First of all, the New 52 and Man of Steel suits are armor. Now, why would Superman, the Man of Steel, need to wear armor? He's bulletproof. That's one of the things that he's most famous for. And while he's certainly capable of getting hurt, the armor is still superfluous. If anything, it would slow him down and make it easier for him to get injured. Now yes, Superman moves at speeds far beyond any human opponent, and honestly, anyone that's not connected to the Speed Force could. But even still, in battles where things happen in between ticks of a clock, every second, every millisecond counts. The armor would also hold back his punches, and again, while this would certainly have no effect on human combatants, when fighting someone like Darkseid or Doomsday, Supes needs to be punching at full strength. Luckily, the Rebirth suit fixed this problem, as it is much more form-fitting, but this doesn't eliminate the final possibly most egregious problem. So yes, to a degree, the trunks are cartoony and old-fashioned. Some might even find it hard to take Superman seriously while he's wearing them. But that's kind of the point. Just take a second and imagine a strange visitor from another world came to Earth. He exhibits powers far beyond anything we could ever hope to do. Faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. You know the drill. Now, he says everything he does is for our benefit. He says he just wants to help us. But he's wearing armor, at the very least a uniform. Sure, he says his intentions are the best, but how do we really know? He could certainly pass as an alien invader just as easily as a heavenly angel. Maybe it's a bit cliche at this point to say people would be afraid of Superman, but it's also a pretty fair analysis of the situation, and there's more than enough evidence to support it. Lex Luthor's feud with him is mostly based on this. Well, except for when it's because Clark burned his hair off. And Lois's father, General Sam Lane, is also generally pretty distrusting of him. In fact, the aforementioned Justice League series by Jeff Johns and Jim Lee opens with an instance of outright hostility between the military and metahumans. There's also the fact that Batman, one of Superman's friends, is still wary of him enough to carry around kryptonite at all times. Oh, and in the alternate dimension of Flashpoint, Superman ends up locked away in a government facility when he lands in the middle of Metropolis instead of Kansas, and people are pretty afraid of him, because really, they just don't understand him. Now, how much would the trunks really help with this? Well, that's arguable, but once again, the suit does resemble classic circus strongmen. As silly as it might sound, the trunks give Superman a look that would be more familiar to the people of Earth, especially Americans. Obviously, this wouldn't instantly make him appear trustworthy in the eyes of a lot of people. Again, Lex Luthor is pretty clear evidence of that, but studies have shown that people are more comfortable with what they're familiar with. So, overall, the trunks make Superman look less alien and more human. They ground him in a certain sense of culture that humans have instead of this alien Kryptonian culture that the other suits invoke. We also can't forget that Clark was raised on an old-fashioned farm by old-fashioned parents. He's not only the biggest superhero out there, but he's also pretty much the biggest cornball. So while the costume might seem cheesy to a lot of people, to him, it probably really doesn't seem all that bad. The trunks also generally mean that the suit was created by his mom, which also furthers the whole less alien, more human thing that it's going for, and grounds it in another continuity-based reason why the trunks are there. The Rebirth suit does admittedly manage to avoid this pitfall partially, and it comes later in a timeline where the trunks did exist at some point, post-Superman Reborn, that is. But it still has the problem of being too blue. I like the suit, just not as much as its trunk-bearing counterpart. This does lead to a question of how to really redesign Superman's costume, though. There have been several changes made since its debut in 1938, but for the most part, it's the same costume. There have been a few additions to the shield and the cape and the belt, but really it's the same thing. And the major changes have been few and far between, notably the brief period in the 90s when Superman was blue and electric, but they've never really stuck and we've always returned to the old school duds. It's such an iconic look, and it's hard to change it. It would be like suddenly radically redesigning Mickey Mouse or Uncle Sam. There are some things that are just too difficult to change because they're so set in people's minds and the cultural zeitgeist. So no matter what, we're probably gonna end up with the same old suit eventually anyway. In the end, yeah, the trunks are goofy. They're silly, they're unrealistic, they're cartoony. But in a way, isn't that kind of what we want out of Superman? I'm not saying there shouldn't be serious adult stories told about him, but the trunks don't necessarily stop that. Just look at All-Star Superman. Heck, he even has the trunks in Dark Knight Returns. Superman represents a more innocent time, though. He represents the dreams of a couple scrawny kids from the wrong side of the tracks. And some part of him should always show that, even if it means he's wearing underwear on the outside of his pants. So that's all for now. Tell me what you think about all this down in the comments below. Trunks or no trunks, you know. Thanks for watching. See you here next week with a brand new video. And goodbye, everybody.